Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this is a continuation of the video where we marked our chiffon dress. Now let's cut this dress. Before we get started, let's talk about a couple of things. I like to have a very large space to lay my hem out, all right, which is why we're on the floor. And then I like to use a couple of tools. So I have a regular measuring gauge, but this one is my favorite. This is called the 5-in-1 measuring gauge, and I love this straight line here, and it's long, so that's helpful as well. So the 5-in-1 measuring gauge. So when I measure, I'm going to place this at the mark of my pin, and then I'll move this down, and when we actually hem the dress, I'll give you the math of it, but this will help us place our new mark for cutting. Next is a Clover Chaco liner, and I love these things. So let's pop the lid off, and I'll just show you on this hem allowance that we're going to cut off. There's a little wheel in here, and when you run that along the fabric, you get a light chalk line. So the Chaco liners come in several different colors, and you'll want to test it on your fabric first. We are actually going to cut right on the line that we draw, so it won't matter as much, but there's several different colors, so if you have a white fabric, you might need to use either pink or light blue or something, okay? So test that out, and then you'll want to make sure that you have a sharp pair of fabric shears. And I like the Gingher brand, but you just want to make sure that you're not using scissors that you cut paper with. Make sure they're sharp and they're used for fabric. So let's talk about how I have this dress laid out. I found my side seams. These are my two side seams, and I lined them up. My center back seam is back here, and my center front is over there. So I folded the dress hem in half because it's symmetrical, and I just wanted to explain that a little bit more. But yeah, so these are your side seams, and they have to be even, and then you can lay it flat out from there. And one thing that's important that we talked about in the first video was to pin both side seams. And this is a perfect example when I line these two pins up, because I can see, let me pull that back. Here's the pin on the other side seam. You want to make sure those pins are even. All right, so if one of the sides hangs down lower, for instance, this top one hangs down lower, it's even with the pin underneath it, but it hangs down just a little bit lower, we know that these were the marks that were even with the floor. All right, so as long as you leave enough hem allowance to play with, we're going to be okay. Remember, we marked these exactly where we need them. All right, so the rest of it, you'll just want to make sure that it's generally pretty even, that it's laying nice and even. Again, these two hems right here are a little bit uneven, just a little bit. Okay, but everything else, basically you want to make sure it's not laying like that. You want to make sure it's nice and flat. Now, if you pinned more, you can make sure that those pins on top and bottom are pretty even with each other. So for this chiffon gown, I'm going to do a 3-thread overlock narrow hem on the serger. Okay, so I need to leave 3/8 inch hem allowance, and that's going to give me just enough hem allowance to where the serger will just roll it up into the hem. So we need to leave, again, 3/8 inch hem allowance for a 3-thread overlock narrow hem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my measuring gauge, measure from my pin to the bottom of the gown. All right, so that's exactly how much I have at the center back seam. Then I need to subtract 3/8. Okay, and that's where I'm going to draw a mark. This is going to be my cut line. All right, and we want to make sure that we keep that excess fabric because it's kind of nice to practice on. All right, so I'm going to do that same thing at my side seam and my center front. Okay, now we just need to mark in between. You might find that more is cut off of the front. I find that a lot. Let's see, this is 3.5, and let's measure the side, which is 3 1/8. So you could do 3 1/4, like you can find the middle ground and mark in the middle. If you're comfortable, you can kind of eyeball it. And that's something, since I've been doing this for a while, but you can measure in between. And if you're in doubt and you want to drop it down a little bit, that's fine. You can always hem it shorter. All right, so I'm going to stand up and just make sure it looks pretty straight. Fix a couple lines. Make sure the hem stays straight. All right, now I'm going to work on the back. So again, I can measure here, and that's 3 1/8. What was that? About 3 1/8 as well. So we can do right in the middle. So let's continue that line on. Make sure you have enough lines so that you can follow it with your scissors. All right, we're finally ready to cut. So we can remove those pins because we have our new mark. And if you want to pin, you can pin these layers together so they don't move. And I'm just going to cut right on that line, keeping my 2 layers together. So just keep a steady hand and follow that line. This is where you have to make sure no little kids come running through the room and trip over the dress and mess everything up. Not that I would know. Alrighty, so we are going to remove this fabric, but make sure you hold on to it because you can practice with this fabric, which is very important, especially when you're new to this. So we just cut the chiffon layer. Remember that we still have our lining layers, and I had pinned this separately, so I'm going to cut them separately. And I have both linings pinned together, so I can cut them together. We need to find the side seams again. And you can tell this isn't as full. Okay, so find those side seams, and they just fall right together. And we are going to mark this exactly the same way because I'm going to hem this exactly the same way as the chiffon. So that's it for cutting. Let's hem this dress.